Is the president of the Municipal Taxpayer Advocacy Group. He joins us now in Toronto. So, Ade, your group has obviously been closely watching public sector pensions. You say the ballooning costs need to be dealt with, or, bottom line, it's going to have a negative effect on the taxpayer in this country. Can you explain?
Well, we certainly think that this is a priority one issue for us, because it would have an impact as far as sort of showing leadership and setting the tone for both provincial and municipal governments. So, in the old days, we had Robin Hood, who would rob from the rich and give to the poor. But in this case, where we're talking about raising the age of eligibility for the OAS, it would seem to be a case of reverse Robin Hood. And to explain, we would say that OAS right now, to be clear, it's an issue. It's about $33 billion per year. And in about 20 years, we're talking about $100 billion. So it's certainly an issue that should be addressed, especially as baby boomers retire. But we make the case of the reverse Robin Hood issue because the public sector pensions is actually about 4.5% of GDP, whereas OAS is only 2% of GDP. So for public sector pensions, we're talking about $250 billion, which is a much bigger issue. And so we think that if you're raising the age of eligibility for the OAS, you should definitely be doing the same for the public sector. The average recipient for the OAS, we're talking about $6,000 per annum. People need this money to survive. But when it comes to public sector pensions, we're looking at an average of about $40,000 per annum. So a huge discrepancy here, and recognizing again that about 2/3 of Canadians don't even have a pension plan. And so these are the folks who are contributing and paying taxes in order to fund public sector pensions. So we're hoping that the public sector pension issue is addressed. We have some concerns that, obviously, the public sector is unionized. OAS recipients are not unionized. So we have concerns. We would like to see how the budget will play out.
Ade, to deal with raising public service pensions, you suggest switching to defined contribution pension plans for new hires. That would cause a lot of backlash.
Well, the issue here is doing the right thing. The Export Development Canada have gone to defined contribution pension plans for new hires. So we're not talking about changing existing contracts for people within the service, but what we're saying is that for new hires, the government can set the tone, because if the federal government made a move like that, then we could then go to the municipalities who are, still struggling and being choked on their contributions, and say, well, have you considered that for new hires you could have defined contribution pension plans? Like, everybody recognizes, in Ontario, for example, the OMS shortfall is $9 billion. So everybody recognizes that we don't have the money to fulfill this pension promise. And we think that it's important for the federal government to show leadership, at least starting with new hires, and saying, this is what the private sector is already dealing with, defined contribution plans. So why don't we now start with new hires and make the change?
You also want to see MP pensions dealt with as well.
Yes, we want to see MP pensions dealt with, but it's less of a priority for us, and there's a reason why. In Ontario, Mike Harris, to his credit, he did reform MPP pensions, but he did not reform public sector pensions. So, in a certain sense, MP pensions is sort of an easy target, to beat up yourself, right? But what we would prefer is that if there is a way to resolve public sector pensions and MP pensions in the same legislation, because to be quite clear, the impact on the budget of MP pensions is negligible, but the impact on the budget of public sector pensions is huge. So, we're not against MP pension reform. It's a good idea. But what we're saying is that we want to see public sector pension reform at the same time as MP pension reform and OAS reform.
Ade Olumide is with the Municipal Taxpayer Advocacy Group, joining us from Toronto. Thanks for your time today, Ade.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Todd.
And I want to bring Andrew Pyle back into this conversation. We were talking about public servant pensions, but also I want to talk in general about these public servant jobs, because there's discussions that somewhere from where we're hearing different numbers, 25,000 to as many as 60,000. But let's say if the 25,000 number for this purposes is correct, half of those potentially could be to attrition. In terms of jobs, what measures are necessary for economic growth? I mean, how many numbers? If 25,000 is the correct number and half of those are to attrition, we're not talking about that many jobs. That's only 12,500. Obviously, for people who have jobs, that's a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, not a lot.
No, it's not a lot of jobs in the grand scheme of where, if you look at Canadian job performance over the last few years, I mean, it's been spectacular, again, relative to, say, the States. Cutting that many jobs is not a big deal from that context, but it will be magnified. Obviously, once you start going after the public sector, like we're seeing in the States, like we're seeing in Ontario and Europe, you will see the backlash. And I think, the gentleman's comments before, well taken, that that is a huge issue right now, obviously public sector pensions. The government has to decide which battles to wage right now. Once you start going after the public sector, one is going to be on jobs, cost cutting, the other is on pensions. I mean, obviously, I think of the two, jobs and getting the cost under control is probably a little bit easier for the government right now. It's not going to be that easy, but you're going to probably get less backlash than going after the pensions.
Our conversation is going to continue as we move forward ever closer.